when folks were coming up with the Big Bang Theory, which was like the worst thing in the world when I was growing up learning about the Bible. It's like, oh, well, some people believe in the Big Bang, but we believe God created it. One of the arguments against it was, we can't put out this Big Bang Theory because all the theologians are going to be there already meeting us there. You know, I mean, and if you believe that the earth was created from a Big Bang, like, then it asks the question, like, what comes before that?
Welcome to Creepalachia. Today is a very personal episode about my life and religion, and I have a really good friend here named Chip Bennett. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so some backstory on what we're doing here today, y'all. We're going to get into Christianity in Appalachia, or across the world, or however it translates will be totally great. But there's a lot of hard questions I've had my entire life, and I put out on Facebook talking about this, but in case you don't know, we're going to get into religion today. We're going to ask all kinds of hard questions I've always had and haven't really worked through the answers on how I feel about things yet. And I think this is going to be a really beneficial conversation for everyone out there. So Chip, let's get into you first.
All right.
So you are the District Superintendent of the Southern District of the United Methodist Church in West Virginia, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
So I've served in this role for about 4 years now. There's somewhere around the 110 churches in the Southern District. And so, part of my job is supervision. Part of the job is working together with churches and mission. And it's all sorts of things. But really at the heart of things, I'm a pastor.
Heck yeah. And I haven't heard you preach, but I'm sure it's great.
I kill it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Blowing it up. So.
I'm very humble too. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I mean, naturally. Well, and so you all will know, I've shared with Chip that I kind of lean more on the agnostic way of thinking, but I don't want that to scare you off. I mean, obviously, if you don't want to listen to religion, turn off now, because that's what this episode is about. We don't do politics, but religion is so deeply intertwined in the themes of this show that I feel it's important to explore it. And for me personally, I grew up old regular Baptist. I don't know if you know a lot about
some. You know more than me, so you'll have to fill me in.
I mean, I still know very little, but I do know that there's tons of great people. I don't want anyone to really... Chip's the perfect person to have this conversation with, because I don't want to offend anyone on your religious beliefs. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone and saying this person's right and you're wrong. That's not what this is, because I know religion, if someone can use it as a way to make their lives better, to make the lives of their community better, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I'm so glad that we have such a wide audience. We've got people all across the spectrum, and that's what I've always wanted to do. So yeah, and I wanted to show people you can actually have a conversation. You don't have to yell at each other.
I don't think there'll be any yelling happening today.
No yelling, but there's gonna be a lot of discussion, and I hope everyone out there finds something from this, because I think it'll help us all out. So Chip, let's get into some background of you. Like, where did you grow up? I don't know these things.
Yeah. So I grew up in Buchanan, West Virginia. So I'm a West Virginia guy, born and raised, and spent most of my life as a young adult in Buchanan. And so that's really where I call home. My brother and my sister are there. My mom is there, and then lots of other friends and some extended family as well. I'm married. I married for 17 years now, I think. If I'm wrong, forgive me.
Nice.
We got 3 kids and one that just got her learner's permit. So we've been navigating that pretty recently too. But I grew up in Buchanan, was very involved in church my entire life. My mom and my dad we're the type of family, if church was open, we were there. So Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday night. And so church really was a lot of my life growing up. And, throughout my life, I really just kind of kept taking steps into that. When I was in high school, I became involved in a ministry with some other friends at that time. And so we did all sorts of things from skits to music and production. And it was a kind of a unique time in my life. And so I've kind of always been taking those steps towards things, in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in a church. I grew up in a non-denominational church. And that's really is where, I came to faith and grew a lot in my life. And I have a lot of really good things that came out of that. And just like anything, there's also negative experiences that come out of that too. I've heard that there are other people that have negative experiences with churches too.
Mm-hmm. Sure. No, yeah. I mean, that's the theme for the day.
Yeah.
But we're going to work through this.
Yeah. And so, there's all sorts of things that have happened throughout my life and my calling that's led me to where I'm at now. But probably one of the most significant things is that I was working full time for the West Virginia National Guard. So I was working at the USPFO in Buchanan. I worked in resource management, payroll, and accounting essentially. And then I was working part-time at this non-denominational church that I grew up in. And I continued to feel like God was calling me to do more with ministry in terms of just vocationally. So stepping away from this life of working full time for the National Guard, and I'm still in the National Guard as a chaplain, by the way, but moving into more vocational ministry. And I had all kinds of crazy ideas of what that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember at one point I was like, I'm going to open a brewery and then I'll have church in it on Sundays. I don't know anything about brewing beer. I don't know anything about running a business, but that was some, crazy idea in my head. Or I had this idea that I wanted to be like a whitewater rafting, kayaking chaplain. And so all these guides and folks that are on the river all summer long, I'm like, oh, they need somebody to be there with them. So that'll be me. Now, I don't really know. I've gone whitewater rafting, but I'm not a guide, Right. I've never whitewater kayaked or anything like that before, so.
That's fabulous. It'd be a little tough on those class 4 rapids.
Maybe. And then I would have these ideas. I would read about Phoenix, and I'd be like, oh, Phoenix sounds like an awesome place to go, or Seattle would be like a fun place to go and do ministry, and I'm just kind of daydreaming about all these different options and opportunities that are in front of me. And probably one of the most pivotal moments in my life was my wife and I were in the Canaan Valley area. And so I'd heard about the Purple Fiddle before. Have you ever been before?
I've heard of it. I've never been.
Listen, top notch for me. It's a great place. And so it's part music venue, part ice cream shop, part restaurant, part brewery, and they've got stuff on tap there. And so but my wife and I were there for our anniversary, and I had this moment where I looked out at the people that were gathered there, and I saw, just this diversity of folks that were there. I saw old folks and young folks that were there. I saw white people and black people that were there, and I saw probably one of the most profound things that I saw when I was there is this young man that was special needs was there, and he was there with a young woman who got up and they were just dancing during the show, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a more spiritual experience. Maybe not more than church, but it's as spiritual of an experience for me at that moment as I'd had in church. Mm-hmm. And so all of these other places that I've been dreaming about doing ministry, it all kind of faded into the background. And I knew that I was called to do ministry in West Virginia with the people of West Virginia, because if I moved to Phoenix, I'd hang up pictures of Blackwater Falls, right?
Right, yeah,
You
sure.
know, if I moved to Florida, there'd be a picture of the New River Gorge Bridge on my wall. I'm like, why would I move away when I could just stay right here where I'm at? And that really solidified what I would describe my call is to be in ministry to and with the people of West Virginia.
Mhm.
And that really has, amongst everything else that's changed in my life, that's remained constant, from that moment on.
Yeah, man. And I'm glad you stayed because
yeah, me too.
We are a better state for it. I'll tell you that. And anyone who knows Chip knows exactly why I mean that. But so it's the backstory on me with Old Regular Baptist. So basically it was, Wednesdays, Sundays, and some Saturday nights. And I would go with my grandpa, who's my favorite person in the world. That's one reason I wanted to have this conversation. This I don't know if this is the smartest idea to do this on the publicly on the podcast, because this is a conversation that, like, I feel like I would hurt their feelings, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And I don't know, though, because it's probably not fair to them for me to never brought these things up, because they haven't had the chance to say, oh, well, here's what I think about that. I just always assumed growing up in this not strict Christian environment, but like everyone's big believers. Yeah. And you want to be a believer too, because your family does. And there's a long time where I just knew I did. It's like, I don't know. I know the vibe here and the fellowship is great. And I know this is a thing, and I know God's real. And I'll tell you right now, I still don't deny that. I just don't know if we necessarily know what God is. I don't deny the fact that having an infinite universe and all these planets and all these things occurring is so, like, I don't know, it's like a winning lottery ticket. Like, how in the world? I mean, really, it has to have been created by something like this. I just personally don't know what I feel about it. But, with them, I just know they loved me my entire life. They gave me everything I ever needed. And I always wanted to do good. And I'll tell you now, I pray every night still. I say, now I lay me down to sleep, pray the Lord my soul to keep. I do the whole thing every night. And I don't know why I do that. I know it feels good. I know it's like, well, I'm good. I'll go to sleep. If I don't wake up, I think that may, get me in there. There's like a little feeling in there. I don't know if that's weird, but it's like, I don't know if it's OCD or what it is, but it's like, I have to do this to feel complete. But anyway, Old Regular Baptist was basically 3-hour sessions on Sunday, huge dinner after, the best green beans you'll ever eat, the best dumplings you'll ever eat, some of the best people. And you notice that typically the age is 55 and above. And then eventually it kept getting older and older and older. And now there's not a lot of members, and it's very sad. But I think, a lot of people kind of like me started questioning things and figuring things out and finding new routes. And I think it just kind of evolved into that. But you get a preacher up there who would get in the spirit, and they would be on a roll, and they'd go for 2 hours. And a lot of times by the time I left church, most of the people that I knew was going to burn in hell. I'll just be honest. Like, they would bring up things about people getting divorced and how it was wrong and different random things. And I'd be like, oh, my mom's divorced. Like, this is what's going on, stuff like that. So I didn't really think about that a lot when I was a kid, but I just knew that, that kind of turns me away from this. I don't want, it's kind of sad, but as I grew older, I started running into these different questions. And I'm like, well, that don't make sense. Like, we're going to talk about homosexuality later. We're going to talk about, why bad things happen, like in Texas right now.
Yeah.
Just an awful flood going on. So Really looking forward to that, talking with you and working through this, because I respect the crap out of you. Like I just know, like, you're probably the only guy I may could have this conversation with.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope your confidence in me isn't misplaced, but I appreciate it.
Oh, well, either way, we're going to learn some stuff. I know I will, because, to get in your position, how long did you have to go to school?
Yeah. So when I felt this call to ministry, I went to seminary. Because I heard there was this place that you could learn more about the Bible and more about all these things that I really didn't learn when I was in Sunday school. And so I went to, I'd left my job with the National Guard and moved to Kentucky, to Wilmore, Kentucky, and I attended Asbury Theological Seminary for 4 years. And so I got a Master's of Divinity when I was there. And that's a requirement to become ordained in my denomination. And the ordination process is essentially 3 years. Like you interview and they say, yeah, we'll give you a shot, but for 3 years you've got to do these things. And then there's another interview 3 years later where they're interviewing you again. And then the bishop ordains you at a big service that we have all together. And so, I mean, grand total, you could trace it to say like 7 years between school and denominational stuff, but really it's been a lifetime, of leading me to where I'm at right now.
How many times have you read the Bible?
Oh, I don't know. I don't keep track.
Countless. Well, see, I got through it once, and it was hard for me to do, because at the beginning you're going begats this, begats that, and I'm like, I'm so lost. Yeah. But I do know that I remember the main cliff notes, but there's a lot that I forgot.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's a little bit to wade through, especially outside of the context, because there's got to be context to everything you read. And, but it is. And then there's some translations that make it even harder. I don't know about you, but I don't use these and thous when I'm talking to people every day. But, some folks, that's the sort of translation that they're going to read. And for some people, they can read it just fine and they understand it. I'm not that smart. I need something more on my level, So, there's a lot in there, and I think it's important to also remember, like, it shouldn't be inaccessible to us, right? Like we ought to be able to read it and ask questions of it and explore it and poke it and prod it, all of those things.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time where you was deeply questioning your journey than others, or have you always kind of knew, like, well, no, I know this part. It's just this other part that I'm not sure about.
Yeah. I mean, having like a crisis of faith, I don't think is a very uncommon thing. And people kind of come through that on all sorts of different levels and for all sorts of different reasons too. For me, I don't know if I ever had a crisis of faith of like, I'm not sure if God exists, or I'm not sure if this thing that I've had plenty of times where I'm like, this thing that I've always been taught, I'm not sure if that's true. So, there's all sorts of places where that's kind of come out for me in places where faithful Christians oftentimes disagree about things.
And then do you think, like, because from what I understand, is there something that says you're not supposed to read translations? And then there's like a Hebrew version that people like, can you explain? I guess we can walk through that one first, because I've always heard like, well, King James is a translation, so technically you're not supposed to go by that one. Or I've never really looked into that, but at the same time, like you said, that's not how we talk today. So how are you supposed to understand?
Yeah.
What is it? Aramaic was the original version or something like that?
Yeah. So, here in Appalachia, you've got a lot of people, and I know some of them, and they're great folks that insist on the King James version is the only one to read. Now, I'm not a very good person to ask on why that ought to be, because, I don't hold to that conviction. I've read the King James, and some of the most poetic, beautiful language you're ever going to find anywhere is in the King James Bible. Psalms 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Right. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's King James.
Mm-hmm.
There's people that even take a little further, and there's, the King James version was commissioned literally by King James, who wanted a translation to come from Latin to English. And so he commissioned this in 1611 to be produced. And so then there's folks in our neck of the woods that insist on a 1611 King James version. And they were translating it from Latin, from there. And, the original scriptures were written in Greek and in Hebrew and in Aramaic, like you said. And so you really want to get back to it. That really is the place to go, but not a lot of people have the margin to learn Greek and Hebrew. So thank God that we have these modern translations of things that are there for us.
Oh yeah, and they even got they have translations that's like in layman's terms, today's language.
Yep.
Okay, so in your opinion, like it's okay to kind of go through those and get what you need?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really helpful to have, sometimes you read something, you're like, gosh, I don't even know what that means. And so if you open up another translation that maybe phrases it a little different or orders the words a little differently, you're like, oh, maybe this is what they're getting to. And there's always flexibility, I think, with interpretations, but especially with the different translations that are out there. Absolutely. I mean, I think I'm a use what makes sense for you.
Yeah, that's good to know. Do you think that's how denominations began? Is they were like, well, you think that, but I think this. So I'm going to go over here and take my 4 people and we're going to start this thing. Like, what is your opinion on denominations? Which I know you're Methodist.
Yeah.
But is that just because that kind of aligned more with your values, or you kind of was like, yeah, that one sounds right?
Yeah, gosh, that's a big question.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, we're going hard.
Yeah,
I know. I have notes here, y'all. This is not the icebreaker that we had originally planned, which I'll get into.
Yeah, I thought we were going to ask if God wanted somebody to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah. The original icebreaker was, does God really want a certain team to win the Super Bowl more than another? Let's answer that first.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Can WVU win the Super Bowl?
I mean, that would be amazing. I would think that he would prefer that to be on, or she. That's another thing. Is God a woman? Is God a man? But yeah. So now that we've got that, so is God's a Chiefs fan? Obviously, since they've been taking it the past.
Now, my daughter, who's a huge Taylor Swift fan, would say that God is definitely a Chiefs fan.
Okay.
Right. So
except when Travis and Taylor break up.
Yeah.
Or is it Travis? Is Travis Kelce the one that's
Travis or Jason?
I don't know. I think Jason.
I don't know.
Don't kill me, y'all. I think that's close, but yeah. So denominations. What?
Yeah. I don't know. I think that if there's a thing that we can have conflict about in Christianity, and we tend to find things that divide us rather than unite us. Where's that come from? I don't know. I mean, I can give you my best guess. If you talk about these different streams of Christianity, you have the Catholic Church, which I know some about, but not much. You have the Orthodox Church, which I know even less about. And then you have the Protestant church, and the Protestant has all these different denominations. And it started with Martin Luther in Germany, and he saw all these things wrong in the church, and he nailed his 95 Theses to the church door and started the Protestant Reformation. And so there's kind of this breakaway, and that's where the Lutheran church comes from. And then you see this continual split of denominations, over the years. And so they, covers everything from Lutherans to Presbyterians to Baptists to Methodists to non-denominationals and Pentecostals and everything in between.
Yeah. All I know is Baptists are the best cooks, I think. I don't know. I've always heard
that. The Methodists would give you a run for their money.
Okay, gotcha.
You.
Well, so a lot of Italians in Methodists, obviously, my in-laws are Methodists.
That's right.
Shout out Bob and Linda. But that's so interesting. So what were those original issues? Do you remember some of those issues? You said it was 95 bullet points of what was.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have them all memorized. But one of them was the church had indulgences, and if I'm wrong about this, and I'll just throw out a disclaimer in general. I did 4 years in seminary. I studied church history and theology and or Greek and Hebrew and all that stuff. But I'm far from an expert. So if I get off off base on anything. I'm not the expert or a scholar on it, but
well, you're Einstein to me. So yeah.
So like the church was selling indulgences, essentially like, oh, you sinned, so if you buy this indulgence, you can get forgiven of your sin. And so Martin Luther's like, I don't think that that's the way it's supposed to be. And that and amongst other things too were, part of what led him to revolt essentially and spark what became the Protestant Reformation. I'm not sure that he intended, another scholar could help us on this, but I'm not sure he intended to have all this, but it's kind of the natural consequences. So like built in and baked into the Protestant DNA is this idea, well, if there's something that separates us, we can just split and start something new.
Okay, gotcha. Right? Okay. And it still happens today. Like you see new denominations popping up all the time. At least I do. And you see a large, there's like you mentioned, non-denominational, like praise teams and things like that. I had a really good experience going to one of those in Wyoming County called New Life. And I'll get into later on what turned me away from that too. And it's nothing against anyone. Like I know a lot of people listen that probably go to New Life. This isn't against any one person. I mean, obviously if like someone's a racist or a bigot, that's something different. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, this is just my personal journey trying to figure this out. And there's been times where it's like, oh, I don't think I feel right about this. Or there's been other times where like, that's not a coincidence, which I'll get into also.
Yeah.
So all that being said, if you're Methodist, if you're Baptist, if you're, Catholic, if you're Jewish, all of those things, I hope you just understand we're just going to walk through some of these things and see what we feel about them. So the first section we have is exploring scripture and interpretation. So I wrote down a question which basically is, if salvation is by faith and not by works, why does Jesus focus so much on how we treat others? So that's basically just saying like, kind of how I feel is, if I'm a good person, surely I'm not going to be cast into the hell. If I help someone else and make this more about someone than myself, it's kind of like there's not a contradiction, but it's like, well, you got to do this, but you also got to do this. Does that make sense? Like how would you break down what we're supposed to do, versus following the scripture versus just being a good person? If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that the way that we marry our faith and our action really does matter. And that's biblical. James says faith without works is dead. So what we do really matters. How we treat other people, it really matters to us. And so, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes we don't see that from church folks or Christian folks. But what we do matters an awful lot. And I would say that, part of that too is this idea of grace that runs through everything, right? It's by grace through faith that you've been saved. And so, grace is something that we don't earn, but it's a gift that God gives to us. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that's kind of what you're thinking about.
That makes sense. I guess, for instance, let's just say there's a church out west that protests funerals, and does certain things, and you can look them up. I won't even say their name, but looking at that, it seems to me that does more damage. But you're saying like, I think we agree there, like not all faiths interpret things appropriately, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like maybe they go a little hard.
Those folks that have given Christianity a black eye that you mentioned, I mean, it's so unchristian, right? And I don't even want to defend such unchristian behavior because it obviously is. it's all an act of grace. And I think if you're a follower of Jesus, your life ought to be lived in a way in response to that grace that you have received. And, if you do that, then you're doing those things that are helpful to other people. They're just a positive response to that grace. Jesus tells this parable. Parables. Are you familiar?
So I know kind of like there's a lot of things in the Bible. To me, it's like there's one story about these kids being ate by a bear because they made fun of someone because they were bald and things like that. I tend to say, well, that's just a lesson. So is that kind of what a parable is, or what? Is it exactly?
A parable would be like, it's a story with a point, basically. Gotcha. So people would come to Jesus and say, well, Jesus, what about this? And he'd tell them a story that had a point, right? And so I think along the lines of what you're asking, Jesus tells this parable of a man that has a debt, and he goes to the person that he owes this debt to. And it's in a culture where, like, if you have a debt, you can be thrown into jail and where you have to work it off. And it's like a lifetime sentence, essentially. And it's this big debt that he owes to this person. He goes to him and says, hey, I'm not going to be able to pay this back, essentially. And the person that he owes the debt to says, forget about it. You're free and clear. You don't owe me anything. And that's grace.
Sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's grace. Then the story turns, and this same guy that had just been forgiven this debt, he sees somebody who owes him like $5, and he grabs him by the shirt and he says, give me my $5 that you owe me. And, throws him into debtor's jail. And then when the guy that owed him the original debt finds out about it, he kind of lets him have it. And so, like, I think Jesus recognizes that sometimes people who have the most reason to respond with grace and to show people mercy, sometimes don't do it, and how absurd that is.
Yeah, man, that resonates.
Jesus' words usually do.
No, yeah. I mean, listen, there's been moments where I have felt my insides turn like warm, like there's something there, and then I'll kind of walk towards that, and eventually it's like I rationalize my way out of it or something. It's like, so I have felt that, and I'm just wondering, is it because that I know what good, because I live by the golden rule, just like I'm going to be good to you as if I want you to be good to me. I know that's not the exact way it's pronounced, but do unto others as you would have done to yourself, or something like that. Anyway, so that's kind of how I live, by that one rule.
Yeah.
And I think, like, what a world, how crazy would that be if everyone just done that one thing? So in that way, it makes sense. And then you start adding these Tetris blocks on top of it. It's like, well, which we'll get into, but yeah, that really resonates. And also, I got some Dave Ramsey vibes. I'm a huge Dave Ramsey fan.
Yeah,
just so everyone knows, like,
I've watched my fair share of Dave Ramsey videos too.
Yeah, oh yeah. Some great sound financial advice. Highly recommend it. And he doesn't get heavy into the faith part of it a lot. I mean, it's like 5% of the time. He'll quote a verse every now and then, but I mean, it's really like just really sound advice that I think everyone should follow, because it will help us all. But all right, so next we got, how do Christians reconcile the Genesis creation story with what science tells us about evolution in the universe? And I ran in this today. Sometimes I'll get a comment like, we done this story about how we believe Appalachia was part of the Scottish Highlands.
Mm-hmm.
And, it takes over 350 million years, scientists estimate, to have done this whole tectonic plate shift, this whole thing. We got a good post about it that Adria Johnson wrote, shout out, that I got a good overview of it. But anyways, a lot of people, believe that the earth is only X amount of years old. And sometimes that's like 5,000 to 10,000 years old for people that are really hardcore believers in the faith. But I'm just curious, what's your opinion on that? Like, Adam and Eve, and I'm very basic on this, but So Adam and Eve were created. So Eve was created by a rib.
Yeah, the story goes God took a rib from Adam and formed Eve from Adam's rib, and Adam's formed from the dust of the earth.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and I'm assuming like, and then the evolution theory is, we evolved from, I think the first iterance was lobsters or something like that, and then eventually crawled our way up hundreds of millions of years later to have the podcast in the basement of a house.
From lobsters to podcast. It's amazing, isn't it?
I mean, it really makes sense. I mean, like sometimes I'm like, yeah, I got a lobster brain. I mean, that makes sense. But, so anyways, this has always been a contested thing when it comes to religion and science, but I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd start with the scripture and say, I think there's a real richness there that sometimes gets lost in these kind of debates. So just a little snippet.
Sure.
Adam's the first man, right? He's created from the dust of the earth. Well, Adam is the Hebrew word for dirt, dust. And so that's where the name even comes from.
Oh, wow.
And so you're like, I didn't know that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that I'd never learned when I was in church and Sunday school and all that. I'm like, there's just so many layers to the scripture that exist out there that sometimes we're so unaware of. And so, it's telling a story, and there's elements of poetry and storytelling that's all there in those first couple of chapters of scripture in Genesis. But to get to your question, like creationism and evolution and all that stuff, I'd say that number one, it's one of those issues where faithful Christians can disagree on it. There might be Christians that say, well, if you don't agree like me, you're not really a Christian. I'll just hold it in grace and say faithful Christians can disagree about this. Right. So one of them's like young earth creationism. It's like God created the world in 7 literal days, right? And that's probably the one that I've encountered the most in West Virginia and in Appalachia. When I was growing up in church, it was what was taught to me. Mm-hmm. And I've had other run-ins and things like that with that too. So young earth creationism would be one of them. One of them is, I think it's called old earth creationism, where it's essentially where a day is like 1,000 years, so or 1,000,000 years or something. So yes, it was 7 days, but a day is much longer to God, and however that might be. So maybe the earth is older than that, but just the way that we mark time is differently. Mm-hmm. Another is, what do they call it? Like the apparent age, like God created things with age, essentially. So, if you go into smoke hole caverns, you've been to any of these caverns and stuff around West Virginia?
I haven't been there, but I know where you're talking about.
Yeah. So they have these stalactites or the Lost World caverns in Lewisburg and stuff.
That's where Bat Boy was found.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Okay, well, hey, I taught you something.
I like it. I like it.
All right.
But they talk to you and they say, oh, these stalactites take tens of thousands of years to form and stuff like that. And so somebody that would be an apparent age creationist would say, well, God created that with age. And so it just kind of looks like it's that old, but it's not really that old. God created it with age. Mm-hmm. And then there'd be folks that would describe themselves as evolutionary creationists, and so wouldn't see any sort of conflict between evolution and Christianity. In fact, I mean, I don't know.
In theory, if he started it, he caused that.
So one of the things I've heard, and I'd have to go back to verify this kind of stuff, but that when folks were coming up with the Big Bang theory, mm-hmm. which was like the worst thing in the world when I was growing up learning about the Bible. It's like, oh, well, some people believe in the Big Bang, but we believe God created it. One of the arguments against it was, we can't put out this Big Bang theory because all the theologians are going to be there already meeting us there. And if you believe that the earth was created from a Big Bang, mm-hmm. like then it asks the question, like, what comes before that, right?
It always goes down to that.
That's where you find God.
Yeah.
And that's where I would find myself. I would say that I don't see any reason to try to like do some sort of mental gymnastics to try to justify, what this says when I'm not sure that that's what the point of Genesis really is.
Yeah.
So I had a professor say, Genesis is science, but whose science is it? Well, it's the science of people from thousands of years ago. And so they're telling the story of creation in the best way that they are able to tell the story. And I think, again, you take it all the way back to the beginning, like you find God there.
Mm-hmm. That does make sense. It's hard because, I mean, it's an unanswerable question almost. And we're going to run into a few of those, I'm sure, but it's like, you're never going to have physical proof of what happened.
Yeah.
Right. Well, then, you know what I mean?
And there's just all kinds of people that will come up with, evidence for this, that, or the other that they believe in. I've been to the Creation Museum in Kentucky. It's right on the border of Ohio and Kentucky. I've seen all that stuff. I've read the materials about it. I don't pretend to be an expert on it, but in the end, I would say all of that kind of stuff is secondary to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to spend all of our time fighting about, is it this sort of creation or this sort of creation, and none of our time thinking about and talking about Jesus and the life that he lived and the life that he calls us to live, then we're missing the whole point of everything.
Sure. Yeah. The point is, what did you do today? How did you act? To me anyway, it's like, did you consider this to be a good day? Did you give something to humanity or there's a lot of people struggling that don't have the means to do that anymore. Did you help them out or, so I do love that answer, because it's really like you said, it almost points to like, okay, well, so you mean to tell me just appeared with no one involved, no involvement at all. It just, there it is. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that takes more faith than I think than being somebody of faith. Sure.
Like, where does that come from?
Yeah. You're almost more faithful to deny the possibility of a God, which I've never done. I don't deny that. It's just, who is it? Man or woman? Let's answer that.
Oh man. I'd say that if you were going to try to define God as a man or a woman, that we're trying to put God in boxes that God doesn't belong in, right? I think the scripture uses oftentimes primarily masculine language talking about God. And a lot of that's probably because of the culture that it was written in, right? But there's feminine language that's used around God as well.
Sure.
Jesus talks about, he says, looking over Jerusalem, how I've always wanted to bring you under my wing like a mother hen would do. And so, like there's that kind of language is there too. And so I think we can say this. I always say, if we're arguing about whether or not God has a penis, we're really off base.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah. Well, and Chip, I hope not. I'll have to be honest. If it wasn't for Jenna, I don't know where I'd be right now. So I'm just saying, like, women tend to make awesome decisions, a lot more than men do. Let's just say it.
Amen.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So moving on, how do we reconcile the God of mercy in the New Testament with the violent and wrathful God of the Old Testament? And specifically, I think this is where a lot of people really stuck on to the gay issue, is because in the Old Testament, they actually put people to death for being gay. And I just completely disagree. To me, I'll just go ahead and say it. To me, it's if you prefer tacos to cheeseburgers, it literally makes no sense to me why we, let's put it in scientific terms. Let's say you're an Earth that's overpopulated. What are you going to do to, this is my argument for why I believe people's born gay, and I know this ain't the question.
Okay.
Is Old Testament versus New Testament. But why I feel this way is because, there's instances in nature where certain species eventually have the attraction of the species turned to homosexuality, and they did this, and then the species like lowered in population, and there's all kinds of different reasons for it. There's so I'm just thinking it as a standpoint of that. Well, like, okay, if I'm an overpopulated world, how am I going to fix that? And that's nothing. I just, that's why I think that people's just born with an attraction that they have, and it is what it is. It just don't make sense to me on why we have these camps where people send their kids to turn them ungay. I don't know if that's the term. There's
conversion therapy.
Conversion therapy
is what it's called. Yeah.
Yes. I've seen relationships ended, which I won't get into, but I've seen relationships ended over this issue. And it really hurts me. And I'm like, why does it matter? But that being said, you can add that in your answer, but New Testament versus Old Testament. Old Testament was pretty metal. Like, it was like a lot of intense things going on. And then eventually, did they just decide, like, we got to calm this down a little bit? Let's write a new version? Or
yeah, that's calm it down a little bit.
Yeah,
that's funny. I think that one of the things I wouldn't say, well, the Old Testament's one God and the New Testament's another God. They're the same God, and I also wouldn't try to like justify or explain away all the violence that you do see in the Bible, because there's plenty of it in the Old Testament. There's some of it is just kind of historical, like they're just recounting history. One from the Book of Judges, there's a woman who drives a stake through the head of a man while he's sleeping. That's pretty violent,
Oh yeah.
So
I mean, these stories fit perfect with the show, which we may tell later.
If you wanted to do a whole show on call it paranormal, I don't know if I'd call it paranormal activity in the Bible or that kind of strange stuff, there's a plethora of material out there.
I need to study.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a list.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Cliff notes.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect.
But I mean, it's there, and sometimes it's just recorded history. This happened, and it was violent. One of the most challenging pieces of scripture, I think, is found in Psalm. And so the Psalms are like they're songs and they're prayers and poems that have been written and collected over the years. And Psalm 137 is set in a time where the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon. So they've been taken away from their homeland. They're in exile, and they're just expressing this raw emotion. And part of it talks about a desire to bash the heads of their enemies' babies against rocks.
Goodness.
Yeah. That's pretty violent.
Oh, yes.
And it goes to like what the Psalms are, like if that's a prayer or a song that we all sing together in church on Sunday morning, which I don't know if I've ever sung a song quite like that on Sunday morning, but you could perceive that would be a part of their like language.
Yeah.
It's just
pass the beans and cornbread, after you sing that one.
Yeah,
gracious.
But I think what it reflects is just kind of this raw emotion.
Sure.
That people are really experiencing. I listened to a guy one time that said, if the Psalms were my journal, I would give strict instructions to burn them after I died, because I don't want anybody reading that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of like raw emotion that you see in there too. And I would push back a little bit in terms of like the Old Testament's violent and the New Testament's mercy. The New Testament has got all sorts of violent things, that are in there as well. Mm. And again, sometimes they're just recording history, and so you have some of that's in there too. And I would say the Old Testament isn't just violence and bloodshed either. There's lots of grace and mercy that's found in there. Do you know the story of Jonah?
No, I mean, ish, but explain again.
You know the big pieces, right? Jonah and the whale.
Yeah, I know there's Jonah and I know there's a whale.
All
so
right.
explain it to me. I want to learn because I know I've heard these things in passing, but I have forgotten a lot of things.
Yeah.
So
Jonah, God tells to Jonah, "Hey, I want you to go to Nineveh. These people are really evil, and you're the guy I'm going to send there to tell them they're really evil and they need to stop what they're doing and start doing what I want them to do." And Jonah's response is to run away.
mhm.
He's like, "I don't want to do that," and so he goes down to Nineveh and he gets on a boat and he's like, "I'm just going to run away from God." And so Jonah found out pretty quickly you can't run away from God because they're out on this boat at sea, and the storm comes up. The people on the boat say, "Well, who's angered God?" And Jonah's like, "Well, that might be me." And so they decide to throw him off the boat. And when they do, this whale swallows him up. Jonah has this moment of like, "Oh, I shouldn't be running from God. I'm going to do what God asked me to do." And this whale spits him back up. He goes to Nineveh. And when he goes to Nineveh, he says, he preaches this message of repentance, right? Hey, you're doing these evil things and you need to stop what you're doing and turn to God. And guess what the people did? They did exactly that. They changed who they were. And if you were in that situation, you were Jonah, how would you respond?
Oh man, dude, I don't even know. I don't even know if I have that kind of charisma.
Yeah. But if you would respond to just hearing that people responded positively to this message that you preached because God had sent you.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'd have a pretty big head if you ask me. I don't know.
You know what Jonah does?
What?
He goes up on the hill overlooking Nineveh and he has a pity party for himself. And he's like, "God, you should have not had mercy on all these people. Why in the world are you so merciful?" And then the story just kind of ends.
Oh, wow. And that was it.
But that's a moment of grace I think you see in the Old Testament that oftentimes doesn't get told. And the Psalms, or one of my favorite books of the Bible, are just filled like with these moments of grace and mercy and beauty that are in there too.
Yeah. See, I didn't know any of that story. I was thinking of Moby Dick or something. Yeah. I'm
Maybe.
like, wait a minute. Yeah. So is that's a parable too, right?
Well, that's a whole book of the Bible.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. There's a whole book of Jonah. It's like maybe 4 chapters long.
Mhm.
So it's super easy to read. And you get to the end of it and you're like, what in the world? Like it's kind of a head scratcher.
Yeah.
And I think another way to look at the Old Testament is, a lot of times the things that we see as violent or barbaric are actually very progressive for their time. And I can't remember where it is, but there's a passage where it's talking about what to do with enslaved women after you've conquered another country. You're like, gosh, that doesn't really sound like something that you would expect to see in the Bible. And it says to shave her head and bring her into your home and to do all of these things for, and you're like, that sounds horrible, like brutal. But the reality is the way that women were treated in surrounding cultures and societies were much worse. And so what God is doing is bringing them forward like one click, right?
So, and it's so shocking when you read it now, you can't put yourself in that.
We're so many clicks ahead from that. I credit a guy that named William Webb who writes about this. And so there's always just this kind of this movement that God is taking people into justice and mercy, throughout Scripture.
Well, it's there's this book, I think it's called Ordinary Men. But anyways, it's this book that walks through how ordinary policemen in Germany eventually become Nazis.
Yeah.
And like are executing people in the fields and all these, like, it's like they progress step by step, micro steps, but all these micro steps add up over time to this one monster. You know what I'm saying?
I think I heard about that book, and it was like school teachers and things that got drafted into the German army, and then after the war was over, just like went back to society.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I mean, bananas and just so awful. But this is like the reverse. It's like they're working their way out of the darkness and on the way Okay, so that makes sense. Thanks for explaining that. Next question: why does God stay silent when believers beg for signs, healing, or direction? And to me, I feel like this could be all in your. Like, you could be getting signs and you not interpret them correctly, or you could be like certain things could be happening. Like, for instance, I told this story about one time I worked in, this is very small, but one time I worked at McDonald's and I was wanting to leave, and I filled out an application for Walmart like 3 months before that. And I just never thought about it again. I just assumed like, well, I didn't get the job, blah, 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 blah. Well, this big blow up happens at McDonald's. And I essentially get taken to the woodshed, but the woodshed is actually the trash bin, to where they explain to me like, yeah, we're going to fire you now. Like, you're going to be fired and you're going to leave. And I said, okay, fine. I don't care. I don't want to be here anyway. I'll leave in 2 weeks. And they're like, no, you leave right now. Like, you got to leave now. And then I walk in McDonald's, phone rings at McDonald's. I did not put that number in my application. It's Walmart. And they asked me to come in for an interview, literally within 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. That's one of the most coincidental things that I was like, is there something else at play here? I don't know, maybe, but that's kind of that question. Like, a lot of people feel like they try to talk and no one's answering or no one's listening, but I'm just curious what you think about that.
I like your story. It makes me wonder how many times we do miss it because we're not looking for it.
Sure.
Right? And I've had this kind of moments too, where I'm like, just have this profound sense that something I've experienced or something I've seen, or something that's happened is like something that God is speaking to me. And then I wonder, how many times have I missed that? Right.
Yep.
And I think we probably miss way more than we ever catch on to. And so, like, why is it that people pray for these things and ask for these things, but maybe it never happens? I'd say overall, I don't know. I don't know why it is that sometimes it happens that way. And I would say that if signs and miracles and supernatural things, they shouldn't be a central part of our faith. And I'm somebody who believes in miracles. If you believe that Jesus was dead, buried, and rose again, it shouldn't be that hard to believe that God can orchestrate a phone call from Walmart, right?
Yeah.
And so, but why is it that God doesn't answer all of those things? I don't know for certain. But I do know that God does sometimes, and sometimes there are miracles that happen. And I don't understand fully why they happen sometimes and not other times.
Yeah. And I know some people, like, some of the best people I know right now are struggling with cancer, and they're going through all these really hard situations, and they're very faithful people. And I don't want them, like, what's the contrary of saying, oh, well, they don't deserve to be healed? No, of course they do. Mm-hmm. But it's like, then you start getting into the nitty gritty of, well, what's the selection process? Is there one? Here's what I do know. I know that when you have a group of people collectively putting their energy into thinking about you and praying about you, there's something there. I don't know if it's some type of physiological thing or energy thing or what, but to me, I do know that stuff helps on both sides, even if you're spiritual or you're not. I think the energy coming from that and the overwhelming positivity of everyone being joined in on this one thing is something that you could, almost measure. Of course you can't, but it's just a feeling you get, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
maybe that's part of it, but like you said, it's just something that,
yeah. There's a story where Jesus comes across a man that's blind, I think, and his disciples, the guys that are the closest to him, they say, all right, Jesus, so who sinned? Was it this guy or maybe his parents that he's being punished for? Just assuming that his blindness is a punishment, right? And sometimes we talk about like healing and miracles. There's a strain of folks that say, well, if you have cancer and you're praying and you're not being healed, it's because you don't have enough faith. You don't think God can actually do it. Or maybe you have some secret sin, and because of this sin, you're not going to be healed. And Jesus' response to that is he says, well, it's not because of any of those things. It's so that the power of God can be revealed in this man, and he heals him. And that's an interesting story. And I think that for us, like when we're experiencing, let's say, cancer, can God heal you from cancer? I believe so. I've never experienced healing like that before. I have people that I know and trust, maybe not from cancer like that, but would recount stories of healing. Is that we ought to, I think that people of faith use those experiences then in some way. And so, when bad things happen to you, how can you use that? How can you judo chop it,
Sure.
Boone County Ninja.
Oh yeah.
How can you use how can you think about it as a way that you can use, this thing that's happened to you? That may be an unsatisfying answer to some folks, but
no, I mean, it's kind of walking into like, okay, well, here's what I do know. The people that are seemingly not being healed are still great people. So I'm kind of, that's one that I've struggled with, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it yet, because then you hear like, okay, Texas, for instance, summer camp gets flooded. All of these kids end up dying, and then their parents are looking through the rubble and they're doing like, of course they didn't deserve this. Like, but at the same time, is it because, is free will the thing? Is there a certain point on earth to where you just, you got to be okay with God saying, okay, well, you're here for this X amount of time. I'll be here to talk to. I wish you luck, and I'll try to lead you in the right direction. But until then, I'll see you in 75 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that's kind of where I lean towards it. Like, if he does exist, it's more of like, he's here for emotional support and not necessarily to be an integrator and to move and fix things and pay your power bill.
Yeah. The situation in Texas, it's just still unfolding. It's horrible. I mean, I can barely even think about it. I got kids, those kids' age, and it's heartbreaking to think about what those families, are experiencing. And it goes to the problem of natural disasters and evil, and why is it that bad things happen to good people? And again, I think I would say, I don't know fully. I'd say that some of the unhelpful things that we can do when people are experiencing something like that, say the death of a child, is to say something like, well, God has a plan. Maybe that's true, but it's certainly not helpful, or God's ways aren't our ways, or God needed another angel. Yeah, I mean, have you ever heard people say,
"Oh yeah," things
like that?
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's really very unhelpful. So, what do you do in the face of all that stuff?
Because when you critical think about it, it's like, well, he chose a side. Why didn't he choose my side? If you look at it like that, you know what I mean? I don't know. That's kind of how I think it is overall. Of course, people are just trying to be nice a lot of times. But overall, it does kind of lead you to believe, like, well, it's like Job. That's one of them that I kind of know, but, eventually all these people just curse God and die and do all these certain things. And I think it tries to teach you, like, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah. And you were right. When people say things like, God needed another angel, they're trying to be helpful. They just don't have the words to do it. Mm-hmm. And, I think you could there are probably philosophers that can explain, oh, well, it really is this, and you need to think about it this way. And sometimes those kind of arguments and thoughts are helpful. I think what's most helpful to families and people that are in situations like that is to know that Jesus himself experienced suffering, when he was here. That Jesus himself didn't exempt himself from that kind of suffering, even to the point of suffering on a cross. And so there's something where it's if the God of the universe is going to identify with me in that deep way, there is something comforting,
man, that clicks a light switch. That makes sense. He did die on a cross.
Yeah.
So, obviously suffered. So yeah, that makes sense.
It's just the emotion of the cross, that you think about. And sometimes we don't tap into that, and we try to explain it away. And it's not people's heads that they need answers for. It's their hearts that they need answers for. And that's where that real tangible, flesh on flesh love that people experience through the body of Christ, through people who are followers of Jesus. That's where it really, I think
that makes
comes
sense.
Through.
And it's got to be comforting too, if you're really heavy in faith and you go through one of these times, obviously that's going to help you through it, of your faith, So I think that's one thing I wish that I could just all right, now I believe, just turn it on. And because I really wish I could have that comfort of knowing there is more to this. And I do feel there is. I just don't know what it is. Because it's scary to think the lights are going to go out and you're no longer here. Darkness, you won't necessarily, it'll be I assume before I was born. I don't know what that was like either.
Right.
It's just not existing anymore. That's depression level stuff.
Yeah.
I don't like thinking these things. So,
Read some of the good parts of the Bible instead of thinking about all that
there
stuff.
We go.
Right? Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Well, this is the contrary of it being not a non-believer, but being someone who's agnostic level. It's could this be what happens? I don't really feel it is, but man, because I'll get thinking about my daughter and all these beautiful moments we have, and I just start thinking about this isn't going to be here one day. Mm-hmm. And I just think about how beautiful it is that we're experiencing this Chuck E. Cheese, or we're going, and then I just start walking my way into this depression of thinking this day will never occur again. But then I'm but we'll have a beautiful day tomorrow, hopefully, if we're lucky enough. And then I'll wake up every morning and I'll say, man, I'm just grateful every morning I wake up and something's not hurting, or something, I'm pretty healthy overall, but you know what I mean? It's hard. It's easy to lose perspective on those things of just being able to sit here right now and talk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I do have all that stuff. It's just what walks me into the dark depression world is thinking of man, this ain't going to happen again. But then again, maybe that's what makes it so beautiful, is because if every day was just you and your daughter at Chuck E. Cheese for eternity, would you feel the same about that same day?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If every day, or let's just say you felt the same would it be as special if you knew that it was never going to end? Yeah,
I think that Chuck E. Cheese would probably wear off,
Oh, yeah. That's good pizza, dude. Have you been there? Surely you've been to Chuck E. Cheese.
I've been to Chuck E. Cheese. I'm not sure I describe the pizza as good.
Oh, man.
I'm sorry if that's sacrilegious to say.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
But
I find a lot of, I guess I can't think of it any other way, but hope in terms of thinking about eternity and what that looks like. One of the strangest things that I've found as a pastor is my joy that I've found in doing funerals for people. My first funeral was my grandfather, and I dreaded it. like I knew that my family was going to ask me, hey, will you do your grandfather's funeral? I didn't want to do it. And of course they asked me, I said yes. And it was such a life-giving moment for me. And one of the reasons I've really enjoyed it is because I get to share that message of hope and grace that's found in Jesus. And so a lot of times, I think about, what that looks like. And this is going to seem like a strange turn, going from doing funerals to talking about the book of Revelation.
Okay, let's go.
But and I'm far from an expert on the book of Revelation, but I think it's one of the most beautiful books in all of Scripture because it paints this picture of what eternity looks like, and it paints this picture of God's family gathered together around this table, this never-ending table of sitting down and dining together with Jesus. And really a lot of our communion beliefs come from this idea that like this is part of what we get to do in eternity. And when I was a kid growing up, I remember learning in church that when you get to heaven, you're not going to have to eat anything. And it made me kind of depressed, maybe not as depressed as thinking about nothingness,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty dark.
But I was like, well, I'm not sure if I want to go to heaven if I can't get meatloaf and mashed potatoes and corn on the cob, because I really like those things. But the picture that the scriptures give us are this time where we get to sit down at this table together and for all eternity. And, I'm going to be sitting next to somebody that I really don't like. And we're going to have to figure this out, and then, I'm going to get to spend eternity with somebody that I really do like. And we're going to get to, enjoy the presence of one another. And most importantly, being in the presence of Jesus in that moment. And so I see like funerals and that kind of stuff linked together because there is a hopefulness that exists for me because of my faith.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And to me, my church is the food bank. I've talked to you about this. Like, there's nothing I enjoy more than going to a food distribution and people show up who are in need of a certain, of food, and then food is there. I load the food in a buggy. We talk about, the Chiefs or whatever. Just talking to people, and you've been down to distributions before. That to me is some of the funnest times I've ever had. Just out there and working with people and checking like, hey, Rodney, how you doing? What you been up to? You been playing chess? Different stuff like that is what I really enjoy. So I'm just, does someone, and I didn't necessarily put this in the questions, but does someone need to go to church to get into heaven?
Oh yeah. If we're talking about getting into heaven, I don't think I'd see anywhere where, like church attendance, you've got to check your scorecard, and you get up there and St. Peter's going to be like, all right, you were 1 out of every 4 Sundays, so you're good.
You came every Christmas and Easter for like 7 years. Yeah. You did all right. Yeah.
Well, you squeaked in, that would defy the whole point of grace, right? So do I think that they need to go to church, to go to heaven? No. And I think that church is really important. Or maybe I shouldn't even say the word church, because I think even the word church is a loaded word for a lot of people. A community of faith is vitally important to anybody. There are other religions that are like solo religions. It's about me and letting go of everything that holds me to this world, right? And so you kind of isolate yourself. Christianity is a social religion, meaning like I can't do it on my own. Like, if somebody's like, well, I'm a Christian but I don't ever talk to anybody about it. I don't share my struggles with other people. I don't do any of this other stuff. I just kind of go out in nature and maybe, but you're missing the point because we do it together. Iron sharpens iron. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's straight from the Proverbs. And so there's a lot of beauty to a community of faith. And I also know there's a lot of hurt that happens in churches at the same time too, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, to me, you could have church on the street. You could have church in a park. Like the community of faith is the aspect that I think can be beautiful, and is often tainted by people who aren't necessarily faithful to me. They're kind of flawed. You know what I mean? It's like you're misinterpreting, and you're kind of, which leads me to my next question, which, disclaimer, vote for who you want. Okay. Don't get offended. All right. But so it seems like Christianity is used in politics a lot of political movements, all of them really, they all use it. But sometimes, it's so sometimes adamantly against to what I understand Jesus is teaching. How are we supposed to look at those types of things? Is it just something we got to just say, well, that shouldn't, change my opinion on faith? That's their interpretation. Or how do we look at that stuff?
Yeah, faith in politics is a big one right now, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it always has been.
Yep. Well, and it's especially difficult right now because we're living in a really divisive political environment. People say, well, it's the most divisive we've ever been. It's pretty divisive, but I'm not sure it's the most. And we did fight a civil war, and that's a pretty big one. But
a couple civil wars. American Revolutionary War was kind of a civil war.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's undeniable we live in a really divisive political time, and I think that if you were to answer the question, like, why do people do that? I think that many people, well-meaning, good-natured people, think that that's what they have to do in order to be faithful. So they think a faithful expression of Christianity is to align with a particular political ideology. And
is Jesus a Democrat or a Republican?
Yeah, I don't know.
There's another one.
He'd be an independent, maybe, I think.
He'd 100% be an independent.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion. But that's a good way to look at it. It all boils to interpretations to me. I mean, it's like, because in my interpretation, it doesn't matter what necessarily you do. I have to worry, have to worry about how I treat you because of how I want to be treated. That's literally how it all boils down to me, to where it makes sense. And then we add in all these crossroads and intersections. And then I'm like, wait a minute.
So let me ask you a question. Can I?
Sure. Yeah. Lord. Yeah.
So, have you seen where people have melded their faith and politics in ways that you think are like off-putting?
I mean,
a better way to put it.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of ways, and I won't get too political, but there's ways where certain groups of the human race are discriminated against, and then it's used, I think, like, oh, that's not Christianity that's causing that. That's you causing it, justifying it with Christianity. You know what I mean? There's certain things, and now, who am I? But that's how I interpret it. But I realize it's such a powerful thing. Like, you think an agnostic's going to be a president? There's no chance. And not that that's a bad thing. I think faith can be great in a lot of ways. I'm just not sure if the system we have is set up for the right person to be up front because of their faith being used as a tool. Because, across the board, you can tell, like, you don't really live by it. That's all of them. It's not against any party, but that's just how it always has been. It goes back to LBJ coming to Appalachian, taking pictures of him shaking poor people's hands, and like Appalachia's taken more advantage of than anywhere.
I'm glad we've gotten past all that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. I mean, they still do it.
Yep.
They come in this county all the time and, try to paint certain pictures of the place that just isn't the truth. But anyway, that being said, I think it's unfortunately a must that you have to use it. to be in politics. And then I think that does turn people away from it to a certain extent. It's like, wait a minute, you're justifying that with this. I'm not going to do this, when that's not how I believe. That's not how I look at it, but I can see how that's.
I think, this is my opinion, that the past couple of generations of the ways in which politics and religion and Christianity have been put together have done a lot of damage to the church and done a lot of damage to Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. And like my mom, for instance, she's like, I don't want politics in the pulpit. And then as soon as it hits, she leaves that church and finds a new one. And finally she's found one she's real comfortable with. And I understand that. It's like, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to, check on my Social Security if it's going to be available in X amount of years. Like, I want to celebrate with other people and be faithful and us work through this thing together, Yeah. So I understand that. I don't think it should be, I don't think you should know necessarily.
Yeah. And I'm not somebody that doesn't have political convictions. I do.
Sure.
But I don't want to wear them on my sleeve and then exclude people that maybe I could have a wonderful relationship and they could influence my life in positive ways, and I could influence their life in positive ways. And so, you just have to know the dynamic of the environment that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's the thing. And you got to do things like this, like sit down and have conversations. Yeah. And, it's becoming harder and harder to do in that world. But we got to do it. I mean, that's how the whole thing started. All these people that disagreed got together and agreed on this one thing.
Yeah.
That's how good things happen. But in that being said, why do sometimes, let's talk about televangelists. Why do sometimes some of the loudest Christians, well, I'll go back to this question. So why does sometimes one of the loudest and most public Christians come off as the least compassionate? Does that make sense? It's like, I don't like.
You want to ask one of them to come on here?
Oh yeah. All right, you're in the hot seat. Yeah. I mean, ask me questions too, because I know this is like Chip is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, have you seen that before?
Sure. Well, I've seen it being used as what I consider hateful. Obviously, with Westboro Baptist Church. I'll just say it. Protesting. They came here and they protested minors dying from Upper Big Branch.
Yeah. Horrible.
Disgusting. Most people agree on this. I just don't know. And that being said, I don't think that they're really bringing people into the religion doing that. No. I think most people are going to be like, you know what? I mean, maybe there's a couple out there that they've pulled, but I don't know if there was hope for them. But anyway, mainly televangelists. So you see things of like, Kenny Copeland, let's just say it. There's a video of him talking about why he has a jet. And
he needs it for his ministry, right?
Yeah, for his ministry.
He needs two of them, maybe.
Exactly. He's worth $400 million. Now, has he helped people? I'm sure there's a percentage of people he has helped find faith. But I see that also in turn as like, man, there's some people too that give their last dollar thinking that this is, like you mentioned the story earlier that really resonated of like, you got to pay this so you'll get here. Yeah, and, why the King James Version was even started. That really resonates. And there's a story. What's the story about Jesus flipping the table exactly? I'd like to hear that exact story if you know it.
Yeah. So the story is that Jesus is going into the temple, and as he's walking into the temple, there are people that have to provide sacrifices as they're going into the temple, and so there are people that are monetizing that. They're like, "Oh, do you need some doves for your sacrifice? I've got some right here," and they're making money off of folks that are coming into the temple to offer these sacrifices.
Right.
And Jesus sees it. I saw somebody comment about this recently, and it says that he braids his own whip. So Jesus, I kind of always have pictured it as Jesus going into a fit of rage and going in and flipping over tables and cracking a whip. But actually Jesus sat back and was like, I'm going to give it to these guys. He braids his own whip, and then he goes in with a whip, flipping over tables, driving these money changers, these people that are selling these things for sacrifices, out of the temple. And so, for a long time, people have tried to make money, just to put it bluntly, on faith and Christianity, and it still happens today. There's lots of prominent pastors that, on the outside looking in, you say, "Huh, I wonder why you use your resources like that."
Yeah. Well, the guy with the really nice smile, Osteen. So I woke up. One other story. I woke up at 3 a.m. I don't even know why. I don't know if my sugar was low or what it was. And he was on the TV. And I was listening to this sermon, and I don't know what it was, but it's one of those moments where I kind of felt something and rationalized my way out of it. But everything he said soaked into my skin. Like everything he was saying made so much sense at this one point in time. I don't even remember necessarily what he was saying. And I don't know what happened, but I was just sitting there and I felt like, man, I know 150% what he's saying right now. And I've never heard something resonate this much. And I got up the next day, forgot all about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was the moment where it's like, latch on, dummy. But at the same time, I disagree with him, taking advantage of people. I just think it's taking advantage of people who are in bad situations, who are searching, who are in need, and want to feel like they have a plan.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't think that if you're a Christian that then you're automatically, God says you have to live a life of poverty, and give all your money away to the poor. Although that is a parable that Jesus tells, and he's using hyperbole to talk about this. But in the same breath, we do have an obligation to help people, and sometimes people of faith don't model that very well.
Well, in the same turn, like him obviously reaching a mass audience, could it be arguable on the resume that the numbers have earned him this certain life? If that makes he did pull more numbers.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think that there's probably, and it's not for me to judge that, but there's probably a place where it's like, okay, I have enough. And so I want to share more. Now, where that is for different people and in different, stages of life and things, I don't know if I can really describe it, but I could say without any hesitation, I have known way more people that have modeled a life of generosity and helping people because of their faith than somebody like celebrity pastors that get in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I told you, there's this feeling when you talk to somebody of they're a really genuine soul. They seem, I don't know, it seems like there's this tension that's not there when you talk to other people that are kind of maybe struggling a little bit. I don't know, which I'm sure you have your own struggles, but
I don't struggle about anything.
Oh, right. There we go. Well, that's great. I'm glad someone doesn't. But I think you're right. There's so many, and you don't hear about these people because I think there's a certain point your ego puts you in the Astrodome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Here's the crazy thing is that nobody's immune from that.
Sure.
Everybody is susceptible to it at some point. Can I tell you one of my pastimes that I'm not proud of?
Sure. Yeah. Let's do it.
Just confession time, right?
You robbed a bank.
No. I, in my weakest moments, maybe not weakest, but in some moments of weakness, I love reading about the downfall of celebrity pastors. And so you get out there and there's a plethora of stories out there of somebody, who's made it big, and then there's some sort of moral failure and they just come crashing down really hard.
Sure.
And I love reading about all that stuff. I love the sword details and everything. And I was talking to a friend of mine about some situation with some pastor that was very famous. And he was like, you and I are like 1 or 2 degrees away from that exact same thing.
Right.
And it really hit me. It's like, oh, you have to really guard and protect against something like that. Now, am I going to get a $400 million jet? I don't think so. I mean, somebody wants to give me one, I'd entertain the conversation.
To clarify, I think the jet was like 20 million. I think he's worth 400 million. Yeah.
That would be a pretty nice jet. Huh?
I mean, that'd be, pretty killer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's something you just have to guard and protect against. And,
well, we did, as a society, we kind of do enjoy the downfall.
Oh, yeah.
But then we love a good comeback story.
Yeah.
We're very complicated.
Yeah.
But I can see that. It's like you saying, ha, you're not perfect.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, now get down here with the rest of us. You know what I mean?
I think there's something really unhealthy about celebrity, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you get this big head, and pastors especially, how many people get to stand up once a week, pontificate for 20, 30, 40 minutes, and people just are supposed to sit there and listen to you. It can be a breeding ground for ego if you don't protect against it. And
how do you protect against it?
Well, I don't preach very much anymore, so people don't listen to me nearly as much. I think that just having a healthy dose of humility, you protect against it. And I'm not always good at doing some of that stuff. I'm not. My ego can get big as well. I probably protect against it because I'm not as good as preachers. Some of these other guys that have huge ministries or dynamic personality or anything like that. But I do think that humility is a huge, huge piece of that. And humility hasn't always been a virtue for people. Mm-hmm. In the Roman world, humility was seen as a sign of weakness. But it wasn't until Jesus that humility became a virtue.
What are some suggestions on how to give yourself a dose of humility? Do you go out and volunteer? Do you go do affirmations?
Yeah. I would point, for most things, like we call them means of grace, or just like an ordinary way that you can experience God's grace. Reading the Bible is a means of grace. Man, if you want a little dose of humility, read through the Bible and read some of the stories of some great people who have made some really dumb decisions. And it's all in there. I think prayer is a really great way to guard against some of that stuff, because it's not just about me talking to God and saying, all right, God, here's my list of things I want you to do for me. But me also, listening to the voice of God in there too. I think like service is a way that we can experience God's grace, because it's a reminder that not everybody lives the same life that I do. I mean, I love going down to the food bank. My wife and I were just talking about, it's been a while since we've been down there, and we want to plan to get down there again for a distribution soon, because there's so much joy that's there. The people you meet are so kind. They're there. Sometimes they'll share a little bit about their story with you. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I think it's again, just an ordinary thing that people can do to experience God's grace. And a side effect of that is a little dose of humility too.
Yeah. I love it. That's a great answer. So, and you answered my scandal question. Why are so many religious leaders caught in scandals? Basically, that's not, to me, that's man. That's not God.
That's right.
You know what I mean? That's not, I can definitely separate those. Here's one. So in West Virginia, and this may be all in my head, but I have, why is questioning doctrine often treated like rebellion instead of an honest search for truth? And actually, this is like a search for truth, this podcast we're having. So I'm just like, why do you think a lot of communities, people are nervous to bring things up? And I may could even answer that, but I'm just curious what you think.
So let me ask you a question then too.
Sure.
Because I'll answer it. I mean, have you experienced that, like where you're asking questions and you kind of get pushed back of like, you're not allowed to ask that kind of question here?
That's a good point, because I'll be honest, that's why this whole thing started, is because this is probably the first time that I've decided to ask questions. I just know I've noticed people, like not for me in particular, because I never had the courage to sit down and say, all right, Grandpa, why is it, let's get down to brass tacks here.
Yeah.
Just because I love him, respect him so much, and I think I would hurt him, but at the same time, it's not fair to me to not give him a chance, kind of, but at the same time, it was held for me out of love.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to hurt these people. So I've noticed people, though, that tend to question things and their experience relaying it to me that they did. And then, some of them don't talk to their family anymore. Some of them, the family dynamic is off. But then again, some of them talk and have conversations and work things out and figure out like, hey, maybe Jimmy is going to be a Muslim now and we still love Jimmy. So that's the only way I've noticed that. But yeah, to be honest, like I haven't, because I haven't actively searched that out of love and fear for rejection.
Yeah. I think one of the analogies I've heard that's kind of helpful for me is that for some people, their faith is like a brick wall. And if you start pulling a brick out, it makes the wall less stable, right? Mm-hmm. So if I pull out this brick about creationism, like, wait a second, the whole thing might start coming down around me. So we just don't question anything. And if you start coming to me with questions, I'm going to give you these answers, and this is what you're supposed to believe, and this is how you're supposed to believe. And again, I think most people do that out of a sense of like, this is what it means to be faithful. Like, they're not trying to do something harmful. They're trying to do something helpful for people to do that. The other piece of that analogy is I've heard it described, faith for some people is like a trampoline. So we got a trampoline in our backyard. The kids jump on it all the time. And if one of those springs came out of the trampoline, they could still jump on it. Right. And so, I think that asking questions then, is kind of like those springs on the trampoline. Like we shouldn't be afraid of doing it because, our faith can hold it.
Oh man. That's great. I've just pulled out too many springs on the trampoline. That's what's happening. We fell through the daggone thing.
Yeah, we need to put some more in.
Yeah, we need to reconnect them. And that's I mean, just this alone is really. I'm really enjoying this, and I just hope everyone else it's resonating too. So I think we answered this one already. Why do people believe that God answers some prayers but ignores others without explanation? We walked through that earlier, so I think we kind of answered that. If Christianity is about forgiveness, we actually answered this one too. Why are so many Christians quick to condemn others? And that's more like judgment, a lot of judgments. And correct me if I'm wrong, but all these things boil down to me like, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to judge here. Like, yeah, I'm going to judge someone who I know murdered somebody, and I'm just going to do that. And I'm hoping that God will understand that. I'll call these people out when it's obvious that they've committed this sin against other people who definitely didn't deserve it. But at the same time, I ain't supposed to do that either, right? Like,
yeah. We can easily look at the sins of other people when we're talking about judgment. And people have things we need to change about ourselves. But if I'm going to go around with a bullhorn saying it in the most aggressive way possible, what's the likelihood that somebody's going to hear me saying that? We need to find ways to share those sorts of things in ways that people can hear it. And Jesus tells the parable of, maybe it's not a parable, but he says, before you go looking at the speck of sawdust in somebody's eye, why don't you pull the plank out of your own eye? Right. And that, that's a pretty important piece of that. And so how we do it, I do think is really important. And sometimes people who've, that have experienced God's grace don't always reflect it in their interactions with other people.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And it makes sense, but because, I'm looking at man-made things and I'm saying this is the answer for something that's obviously way more than anything man ever could have done. Yeah. So
we screw it up all the time. Jesus is like, hey, could you love God and love your neighbor? And we're like, well, could we make it more complicated?
Yeah. So I can still call out murderers just to.
Please do. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Just to clarify.
That's a pretty cornerstone of Creepalachia, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, it's pretty important that we call people out but we've done scam artists too. I'm just like, I got to a point in my life where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to call some of these people out. And then it turned into a whole show, and we're here and we're doing other things too. We're working through religion, and I'm very grateful for it, but that's good to know. Like it's not a sin to call out murderers.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. No, what was you
I'll bless you. I'll bless, yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Bless me. Perfect. So I'll have to get a Catholic priest in here too, because I'm curious about a lot of things.
That would be really neat.
Yeah. All right. So this will get into, all right. So if Jesus preached radical inclusion, why are so many churches exclusive or judgmental? And particularly, let's go ahead and knock out two questions that I have down the road with this. I have a question. There's a lot of churches that don't believe in women being in the pulpit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of churches that don't believe in including gay people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Methodist is actually one of the more progressive denominations out there. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but why is that is it misinterpreted, or like, what do you have to say about those things?
Yeah, so just, the idea of inclusiveness, at least the way that Jesus practiced it, and then if you hold it up against what we oftentimes see in American religion and churches, it looks a little different. Jesus was, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. He's pretty radically inclusive to people that others wouldn't even touch. Jesus would touch.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody with leprosy. Jesus would touch them, or a woman caught in the act of adultery. Jesus offers grace to that person, or a woman coming to draw water from a well in the heat of the day because she knew that all the other women wouldn't be there and ask her questions. Jesus shows her grace, and she responds really positively to all that. And so why is it that sometimes we don't live up to it? I don't know. I know there's just so much of the culture wars that exist politically and just culturally. They permeate the church too. And that's it's sad, honestly, to see it that way. Our denomination, I'm United Methodist. We've allowed women to be in the pulpits for a really long time. Now, we haven't always done that. We've had to, come around to it, and some of our what our rules allow in terms of same-sex attracted people have changed recently too. And so, I think that in the midst of all of this stuff, one of the things that we can miss is that people are, number one, everybody's created in the image of God, right? And that's a fundamental, orthodox, conservative, progressive, anything in between Christian belief, that everybody's created in the image of God, and that God loves everybody, right? And that means people of all sorts of different political persuasions. God loves the Republicans and the Democrats, right?
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Write this down.
Yeah.
God loves people regardless of how they identify sexually. God loves people. God loves people. And, we sometimes feel to say, but now you need to do this, this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those things are true, but sometimes we lead with the wrong thing. Does that make sense?
No, yeah. Or abrasive or hurtful. But you know, you saying we're created in the image of God, so God can't be a man or a woman, like you was mentioning earlier.
Right.
It's just, it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or yeah, it is. I don't know how else to put it, but that definitely strikes. But so you believe someone can live a gay life, have a husband or a wife, you know, grow up, adopt kids, be happy, and then go to heaven. Is that clarifying it? Or is there a certain, like, you know?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to who goes to heaven, that's way above my pay grade, right? And I know that seems like I'm evading the question, but it's the truth. I mean, anybody that's like, well, this person is not going to go to heaven. I was like, well, I don't know. God might have all sorts of things that I don't understand. In fact, I believe that there's more that I don't understand about God than I do understand about God. I also think that God calls us to a holy life in all aspects of our life as well. Does that?
No, yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's not, you take the man-made judgment out of it. And I think that's how it should be, because the way I'm interpreting it is everyone deserves the right to find Jesus, like plain and simple. And in the end, you're not checking the box if they get in the gates or not. It's yeah.
Thank God, literally thank God that it's not me or you or anybody else, you know, the ones that get to check the box to say who's in and who's out.
Sure. Yeah. And that's, you know, if there was a more approach, an inclusive approach to these things, I think that's the only way that it can grow, to be honest, because if humans are one thing, we're hard-headed, and, you know, we believe with intensity, but at the same time, you better not tell me exactly what to do, because I'm going to do the opposite. You know what I mean? So I think having that more of a welcoming approach to it would be like daylight and dark. But because in West Virginia particularly, I have a lot of friends, a lot of gay friends that have they've had some hard times, and it's very sad. And that's kind of when religion is used as a weapon. That's when I'm like, wait a minute, like this isn't. I don't think this is how this is supposed to be interpreted. This is just plain mean. And it's nice to hear you say that, because, you know, I think a lot of people out there will be like, oh, okay, I like this Chip guy. You know, it's just kind of understanding.
Yeah. Well, you know, somebody gets to know me and they'll be like, well, I don't like him.
Right. Yeah.
But there are, I think that, and I'm like just steeped in the church world. I think a lot of times churches will say, everybody's welcome here, right? And they'll put that on their signs, and they'll say it to folks as they're talking to them. And but then there's this subtle little thing that oftentimes gets a little louder that says, but not you, and not you, and not you. And that message gets heard really, really clearly by all kinds of different people. I mean, I think that a lot of times poor people in poverty hear that message a ton. Like our churches are places where the kind of well-to-do go, or you've got to have everything together to go.
You better have your clothes washed.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, what happens if you don't have a clean pair of clothes to go to church? And I've heard people, you know, share that with me as I've invited them to go to the church that I pastor. It's, well, I'd go, but I don't really have anything to wear. And maybe that's an excuse, but I think that there's something genuine about that, because they don't feel as if they can come, or they feel if they came, everybody would be looking at them and be judging them. And they, maybe people would, but a lot of people wouldn't. But it's the the message oftentimes that we send that people hear subtly.
And the energy, you feel these things. Like you kind of know when you're welcome somewhere. Does that make sense? And I believe you're right. Majority of people are great people. Welcoming, come on in. It's a pretty small percentage that are like, really, you're like, oh, Lucy better not get near me at, cheating something another.
But it's those handful of people that really set the tone sometimes for especially folks that are already feeling that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the loudest, like we got to earlier. Yeah, because also too, the addiction community, for instance.
Oh, huge.
Yeah,
huge.
Well, I know a lot of churches are implementing programs where they have recovery meetings and things like that. Have you saw anything like that grow, or anything in particular? Work?
There's a lot of churches that run a ministry. I'm blanking on the name of the ministry right now, but it's for, folks in recovery and kind of based off of the 12 steps. I actually, one of the best moments of my life was involved in recovery ministry, and it just kind of happenstance. I was interested in leading a Bible study at the Day Report Center. So the Day Report Center are people that have gotten in trouble, and they're there to do their time essentially in community service, and they do some education. And I was like, hey, can I come in and do this? And they let me. And from that started a whole connection that led into recovery ministry called the Meeting House in Point Pleasant. It imploded, and it was very dramatic. But when it was working, it was so beautiful. And that we met in an old church that wasn't being used anymore. We did AA meetings there. We held concerts where folks from the community and folks in the recovery community would come together. Lip sync battles. I would go on Sunday afternoons. They would do an AA meeting like at 2:00, and I would show up at like 1:00, and I'd do a brief communion service. We'd do a small group, and then they'd roll right into their AA meeting. And a lot of times I would stick around because it was an open meeting. I would stick around for that AA meeting. And I got to tell you, like, if you've never had a chance to sit in one of those 12-step meetings, it is, the presence of God is thick in those places.
Sure. Yeah. I've had people in recovery come on here and tell me their experience, and it's always a very, just inspiring conversation, because I just imagine how hard it would be. Like, it's hard enough for me to not pick up my phone. Like now, times that by 100 and make it to where you get sick if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to get through that? I would say faith. The 12-step program, I've always agreed with the faith aspect of it. I don't know how else you get out of something like that. You know what I mean? Unless you put yourself, I don't know, which I know there's ways to do this without being religious, obviously.
Sure.
But the people I've talked to that used that and are religious seem to have done a really good job and made it several years beyond,
the big book, they're really intentional about, not making it tied to a particular religion, but it is just undergirded with faith. And I would argue Christian faith. But they use words like a higher power. So they're not pushing other people away because they might balk at using the word God.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of, and this is my friends in recovery would stress this over and over for me, of the 12 steps is, like, at the very end of the 12 step, what's the point of that?
I can't remember the 12th one. No.
Well, like it's to have a spiritual awakening.
Oh, wow.
Like,
okay.
Like the whole 12 steps is to have, like, once you've completed these 12 steps, it leads you, it's intended to lead you towards a spiritual awakening. And, the folks that I've known that have worked the steps and have been in recovery and, have years and decades even of recovery, they are deeply spiritual people. Sometimes they're not Christian people, but they're deeply spiritual for sure.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, all right, since we got into televangelists, let's talk about these big churches.
Yeah.
All right. So, why do churches spend millions on buildings and technology while people in their own communities go hungry? Again, that's televangelists mainly. but you got to have a big enough building for people to come and celebrate. And it's, from what I understand, and I hate to even answer it for you, but from what I understand, I mean, it's them funding it essentially on their own. Like, what is tithings? Tithings. Is it 10%? Could that mean your time? Is that your money? Is that your 401k?
Yeah. I mean, I think it could be all those things. And oftentimes we talk about it as money, but I mean, people ought to be given of their time and their resources, their talents. And there are people that are gifted in all sorts of ways.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'm kidding. I'm sorry to cut you off.
You especially, JD. Yeah.
Thank you, buddy. Yeah, I appreciate it. Go ahead. But yeah, so is, when we drive by these big churches in these communities, is that kind of looking at it the wrong way? Or is it just like, well, you got to have it big enough to hold all these people with this one faith?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a multifaceted thing, right? It's really easy, especially if you're looking at these big churches and celebrity pastors, to throw stones at them. That's why I love diving into all their the falls from grace or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got plenty of critiques for churches that spend large amounts of money. One, I remember a story of a large church in an area that experienced some significant flooding, and they just locked their doors. Like that space could have been used by the community.
Houston.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not naming any names.
I won't name any names, but yeah. I know what you're talking about.
It's like, it makes you say, I'm not sure that's the best use of the resources that God has given you. I know of a large church, and it made headlines in some little corners of the world, where they were doing a baptism service, and they had a plan for this baptism service to have people planted in the audience. So they said, all right, who wants to be baptized today? That somebody over here would stand, and then somebody over here would stand, and then somebody over here would stand up, in order to like break the ice so that more people would come forward. And to me, like, baptism is really important. It's really important. And to manipulate it like that is just horrible. I hate it. That same church, though, my cousin was going through a really difficult time in his life. And he started attending a Methodist church down the street from him. And he tells the story of his daughter. Every time he'd be coming home, he'd say, well, what'd you learn in church today? Or how was church today for you? Because they had a little children's program or whatever. And she would just be like, and they would drive home, and
sounds like me.
Yeah. And so he had friends that were inviting him to this big mega church in his community. Mm-hmm. And so they went, and they had a good experience while they were there. And his daughter, when he said, what'd you learn in church today? He said she wouldn't shut up. Like the whole trip home, she just kept talking over, like you couldn't get her to stop.
Right.
And he said, that's it. That's where we're going to go. And he and his family, they planted themselves there, and they started getting involved in the leadership of the church and involved in their small groups and stuff. And I could share that his life was totally transformed because of that. And so, yes, I got a real problem with the way they did baptism. And I got a real indebtedness to the ways that they really positively impacted the life of my cousin.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And I'll get in. So, and on that aspect, I was going to this place one time for quite a few Sundays, and we was having a really good time. And eventually they had someone come in, really good singer. And then they started reading people's minds.
Oh, impressive.
Yeah. So they just started like, okay, I don't know. So I'm just making up stuff right now. So-and-so suffered from addiction and lost someone to addiction recently. And then he'll narrow down to this person, and then they'll target on this person. He'll start saying different things. And I'm like, I don't think I'm comfortable with this. Now, granted, this show has made me open my eyes to things like that, of like, well, who am I to judge? Like, there's people that come in here that talk to me about instances where they have helped people that way, and they have helped people find their faith. And to feel better about losing a loved one and different things like that. So I don't know if I misinterpreted it at the time, but at the time it freaked me out. I stopped going.
It probably freaked me out a little bit too. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of was like, I don't know. Is this a cult? I was like, it ain't a cult. It's not a cult. But I was like, I don't know. This is not necessarily, like, I was wanting somewhere to go, be with people, have a community, all of us get together, have all these ideas about how to do better. Cause they had a lot of different sermons that really spoke to me about helping people no matter if you felt used or not. That really, it's like, oh, you've been used. Okay. No, it's not why you're supposed to do it anyway. You're supposed to do it because it's better for humanity to be a good person. It's not to give you your cookies in heaven. It's not to say, okay, well, get in the elevator, come on up. Since you helped that one, it's not for you. It's for the betterment of humanity, to me anyway. And oftentimes I misinterpret that of like, yeah, it feels good to help someone, but at the same time, the greater goal is to leave the world better than what I arrived is my goal.
Yeah.
But that kind of drew me off. But at the same time, doing the show now, I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe I missed that,
Yeah.
But anyway, that was my experience there. And we, we've hit on a bunch of these. Like I had, why did Christianity been used to justify things like slavery, war, and colonization? Like we talked about it being used as a weapon, and how we don't agree with that.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
a lot of these things kind of fit under the same thing. Well, let's talk about this one. This one may be relative since it's in your position. Have you noticed a lot of young people leaving the church?
Oh yeah. There's been a almost all of my time, like in the church world, has been talking about this decline that's coming in church, right? And I certainly see it. I experience it, a lot in our churches. There, and I got a little corner of the kingdom, right? So there's all sorts of other places too, and so a lot of our churches are filled with older folks, and so yeah, there are younger people that are leaving or have left the church, or maybe even never even engaged with the church too.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that some of the statistics that are coming out like right now are that like the we've hit the bottom of the decline, and so where it goes from here, who knows? But I see a lot of interest in faith. See a lot of interest in religion. I think your audience is really neat because somebody who believes in Bigfoot or the Mothman or anything like that, like they obviously don't have any problem believing in something that other people might say, huh? So maybe we could talk about an empty tomb too. I think they go hand in hand.
Oh, is this a story?
No. I mean,
the empty tomb. Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
Oh, yeah. Okay, the story.
The story, the big one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but yeah, you're right. One of the goals of the show is to have all of these people, because West Virginia, there's a lot more opinions than just what somebody thinks. Like there's a lot
very diverse. Yeah.
Yeah. Very diverse place. No matter what people like to say about us, there's a lot of really intelligent, critical thinking people that believe across the spectrum. And this show in particular deals with a lot of death, a lot of tragic occurrences, missing people, murders, but also recovery and some of the things that are brighter because of the dark that they experience.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put that.
Yeah. And so I know people are, and listen, I hope no one signs off from the show because of this, but if it's because, I love gay people, I'll see you later. I don't know what to tell you. Good luck. But listen, I give people the same respect that I want, and that, that's with everyone except murderers. And I feel like having these conversations are really going to help a lot of people find their way, because it's a lot. But what would you? I think we've touched on many things. What's a communion, so people will know?
Communion?
Yeah. Why? What is the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, this is one of those places where there's all sorts of different interpretations out there. And so communion can be called a lot of different things. Some people call it communion, the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist. There's probably other names that I'm not coming to the top of my head right now. And ultimately, it's one of the two sacraments of the church. Sacraments meaning like the things that Jesus gave us that said, do this thing. Baptism is one, and communion is the other. And so it's remembering. Well, I even say the word remembering, that's a loaded term, but it's Jesus he's with his disciples the night that he's betrayed, and they're having this meal together that Jewish people would gather all over the Israel or the world even now, and have shared this meal together, this Passover meal. And in this meal, Jesus takes it and uses it as a way of saying, taking the bread that they're sharing there and taking the wine that they're sharing there and saying, this is my body that's broken for you, and this is my blood that's shed for you. And so sometimes people say, well, when we do communion in church, we're remembering that Last Supper. So they call it a remembrance. Some people, and this, my belief would be that there's the real presence of Christ, like when we come and take communion, like in some strange and mysterious way, that Jesus actually meets us there at that communion table. And I think you ever heard of like a thin place before?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like the communion table ought to be a thin place where Jesus, the presence of Jesus is just palpable. And I think that's one of the greatest things that the church has to offer the world are the sacraments of baptism and communion. And then there's all sorts of other beliefs that come in there as well.
Feet washing.
I've done a few feet washing services.
Is that humility?
I think it's a huge piece of humility. Yeah, we might tack that one on to how do you become humble, right?
Yeah.
And that's Jesus was with his disciples again, and he's washing his disciples' feet, which would be the act of a servant coming to wash people who were supposed to be under him, so to speak, and he's washing their feet. So it is an act of humility.
That makes sense. Yeah, I filmed a wedding where they washed each other's feet. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah, man. It was in Cyclone, West Virginia. I don't know if you've ever been there, but
no.
outside of Oceana. Yep. And people loved that video. Yeah, it was a really special time. Do you have to get baptized to go to heaven? I know you don't decide, but
yeah,
we can give percentages here, like 70% likely,
I would say that baptism is what you ought to do. Like after a profession of faith, like you said, yes, I'm going to follow Jesus. Yes, I'm going to put my trust in Jesus. Like the next step is profession, or like is this baptism.
Mm-hmm.
And so is it necessary? Again, is God going to, St. Peter going to be up there at the door saying, wait a second, you didn't get baptized, so I'm not sure, we're not going to let you in. I'm not sure about that, but it's something that that folks that are Christians should do. And sometimes people have a real problem for all kinds of reasons. Maybe it's like their physical appearance, and they're like, well, I don't want to get in front of everybody and get dunked.
That's sad.
It is sad. And some people just are so shy that the thought of standing in front of people and answering a couple of questions is too much for them. And I've experienced that within my own family and within people that I've been a part of my churches too. Mm-hmm. And so we try to encourage them to be a part of the bigger body of believers, like everybody else that's there. But sometimes there's
it's a very shocking, not a shocking moment, but it's kind of like, it's not awkward, but it's kind of awkward. If you're like an introvert like me,
yeah.
Like I talk good in front of a mic, but in a room situation where I got to get up in front of people and, do the whole thing, I don't know if I'd be any good at it. But so that's interesting to know that you've ran into people like, well, but again, at the same time, is that kind of the point? It's kind of like you're public. It's like a public demonstration of your love, kind of, or is that completely wrong? Could you get baptized just one-on-one?
Yeah, I think that if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I don't want to get baptized in front of everybody. Can you and me do it?" I'd say, "Can we get some other people? Maybe it doesn't need to be everybody, but can we get some friends and some family that are going to be there present with you?" Because really, the way I like to describe baptism, and there's 100 different ways to describe it, is it's an adoption. Like, you're being adopted into the family of God. And so if you're going to be adopted into the family, let's get a couple extra people along with us too.
Oh,
right?
yeah. No, that makes sense. And how many people are we talking? 3, 4?
Yeah, we can,
people?
we'll make provisions for folks, to do it. But there's beautiful, again, the imagery of baptism is so beautiful. It's the act of like going under the water, like dying to yourself and rising to new life in Jesus.
Is that kind of what's going on?
Yeah, that's definitely part of the imagery. And some people get all spun up about, do you have to be dunked, or can you be sprinkled, or can you do it when you're a baby, or do you have to do it as an adult? And again, those are places where faithful Christians disagree about things. But I think that it's not primarily something that I do, but it's something that God does. So it's God adopting me into God's family.
Gotcha. Was you a kid, or have you done it multiple times? Or
yeah, that's a great question. I tell the story that so in my denomination, if somebody said, "Hey, will you rebaptize me?" I'd say, I want to help you remember your baptism, but you've already been baptized. There's no reason to get wet again. You don't have to.
What if they're like, "I've done some pretty sketchy things these past few years"?
I'd say, well, we're going to draw on the deep well of your baptism, and we're going to get you wet again, and we're going to remember your baptism, but we're not rebaptizing you.
Gotcha.
Right? That's how I would describe it. So when I was a kid, I told you I grew up in a non-denominational church. That's true. But when I was very small, my parents attended a United Methodist Church, and they had me baptized as an infant. Well, I didn't realize that until later in life, like I was an adult. And so when I was probably about 10 or 11, I got baptized in the river. And so, sometimes these things aren't as cut and dry as we like to make them in a theology class.
Well, the river, I mean, it's all about someone's perspective, but I would think the river having that organic vibe with nature would really be something special. I mean, it's all special, I'm sure, but you know what I'm saying?
I baptized, somebody wants to be sprinkled, I'll sprinkle them. If they want to get baptized in a
swimming pool,
I'll do that. My preference though would be to go down to the river and do a baptism there. More water, the whole 9 yards. I just think there's something really, really beautiful about it.
You go through all these old coal communities and you'll see where the spot is. Like, you'll see sometimes like, oh, I know what that is.
That's the Duncan spot right there.
Yeah. That's cool. How many have you done?
I don't know. I haven't kept track of how many baptisms I've done, but I've done a lot. Some of the most memorable baptisms that I've been able to do were a mom and her children who she was in recovery. She had her kids there and they were baptized. That was a really beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was running a youth camp, working as a youth pastor, youth director. We had some kids that wanted to get baptized, and so there was a swimming pool there, and it was night. And so we climbed the fence of the swimming pool and did baptisms at midnight in the swimming pool. And it's a very memorable thing.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you broke the law to baptize somebody, or is that a law?
It's a little sketchy.
It's right on the line.
That's right.
God understands. Well, cool. Well, Chip, I think, did we solve anything? I know I feel more connected with it, and I appreciate you taking the time to walk through a lot of these. And a lot of this too is, comes down to me, interpretations, a lot of it, but also not letting man-made things misdirect my path, if that makes sense. That's what I get from it. It's like, a lot of the things I'm looking at are flawed and aren't the true meaning behind the message. So I think really I I really need to run through it again and read through and really think about these things as an adult, because I haven't read it as an adult. I'll just say it.
Yeah, I think another hour we'd have all the problems solved.
I know, right? Yeah. Oh, we can do it.
I think just one thing I would want to share is that I know for you and for other folks, there have been these probably bad experiences in churches, and some people, it's a really legitimate bad experience. You don't have to look very far to see the headlines of the things. And that one simple truth would be that Christianity is Christ. Christianity is Jesus. It's not the church. It might give some people heartburn to hear something like that. Christianity is not even the Bible. Although I think that you find Jesus in the Bible. But Christianity is Jesus. And so there's all sorts of deficiencies in the church. There's deficiencies in the Western culture. There's deficiencies in Christians, but there's no deficiencies in Jesus.
Love it. Well, that's a great way to wrap it up. Tell people, how can they get involved with the Methodist Church? What locations should they go to? Do you only accept people who can cook good biscuits and gravy?
Only good casseroles.
Okay.
Only, yeah.
Gotcha. Perfect.
No, you can get on our website and there's a Find a Church place, westvirginiaumc.org. And there can find a church. And if you're listening from outside of the area, if you just Google Find a Church, it'll pop right up and they can find one. And there's all sorts of great churches. And I would say, don't tell my bishop that I said this, but if you go to a Methodist church and you're like, this isn't cutting it for me, find a place that does. I think it's more important that we find communities of faith to be involved in than they be United Methodist churches.
Love it, Chip.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Everyone out there, I hope you enjoyed and got some from this conversation. It is definitely as personal as I'll get. I mean, y'all know I'm an open book, but before you leave, if you like this video and subscribe to Creepalachia on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, be sure to take a minute and leave a review. That review will really help the show be found. And also, we are on Facebook and on TikTok. Appreciate everyone. And above all else, always remember, long live Appalachia.